Part 1. Day 11,333 of the war. Ukraine is trying to appear more willing to negotiate than Russia. Zelensky has received approval to begin work on a bill concerning elections during martial law. Meanwhile, Moscow refuses any talk of truce or compromise, not only over Donbass, but also regarding the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. The question remains open. When will the White House finally recognize who truly wants peace and who is merely pretending? For now, Donald Trump's anger is directed at Venezuela. The US president has reminded the world that he declared Venezuela's government a terrorist organization and announced the beginning of a total blockade of its oil tankers. He has demanded that Venezuela return stolen resources to America, warning of consequences should they refuse. At the same time, a quieter yet deeply symbolic event occurred. Ukraine managed to return 60 civilians from Russia and the occupied territories, delivering more than 2,000 parcels and letters to Ukrainian prisoners of war. Belgium continues to demand additional guarantees before agreeing to the reparations loan, and negotiations are ongoing. Meanwhile, at the latest Ramstein summit, numerous new aid packages were announced for Ukraine. Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal promised record-breaking foreign assistance worth $45 billion. Across Ukraine, strikes continue, both on Russian military facilities and on occupied territories. Russian forces, in turn, continue their missile and drone attacks, killing civilians as Ukrainian technicians struggle to restore power after previous assaults. Russian troops have created crisis points near Siversk and Huliaipole, threatening new advances. In Pokrovsk, reports even speak of Russian cavalry entering the city. Yes, actual horse-mounted units in the 21st century. But their losses remain catastrophic. As always, the greatest threat to a Russian soldier is not his enemy, but his own command, which threatens to erase him for retreating after being wounded. Everyone has heard by now about the recent school killing near Rubliovka. The more details emerge, the clearer it becomes. The young killer's hatred was fueled by the xenophobia and nationalism being openly promoted across Russia today, particularly through the Z channels. This war kills not only in Ukraine, but also within Russia itself, where the plague of hatred, spread by Putin's rhetoric, mutates into ever more horrifying forms. About all of this, and much more, in today's report, which you can support with a like, comment, or subscription to the channel. These actions help this video reach a wider audience. You can also support the channel financially via Patreon. The link is in the description, or by purchasing NVPN, a secure VPN that allows you to access the free internet and decide for yourself what to watch, read, and hear without censorship from Russian authorities. Buying NVPN through the link supports this work and ensures you stay connected to uncensored information. Remember, VPN use is still legal in Russia. And now, let's turn to the key developments of the past 24 hours. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was yesterday on an official visit to the Netherlands, spoke about the next steps in peace negotiations. At a joint press conference with Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof, Zelensky revealed that the American side will soon deliver an updated 20-point peace plan to Russia. After Moscow responds, consultations between Kiev and Washington will resume. Over the past 2 days, Zelensky has met in Berlin with Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and the US president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Following the meetings, both sides announced that Washington agreed to provide Ukraine with legally binding security guarantees. However, the most difficult issue, territorial concessions, remains unresolved. Moscow insists that Ukrainian troops must withdraw from the entire Donetsk region, including areas not currently occupied by Russian forces. Ukraine considers such demands absolutely unacceptable. The American side will contact the Russians, and then there will be another meeting with Ukraine in the United States at the level of negotiation groups, Zelensky said.
I think this could happen in the coming days, perhaps over the weekend, perhaps a bit later.
According to American officials, the next round of talks may take place in Miami. Zelensky clarified that he himself will not participate in these consultations. Negotiation teams will handle them instead. He also emphasized that Ukraine's future membership in the European Union remains a crucial component of its security guarantees, forming part of what he called the coalition of willing nations. About 30 states have already confirmed readiness to take part in a future peacekeeping operation once a ceasefire is achieved, although the details of each country's role remain undisclosed. Ukraine expects to receive between $40 and $45 billion in aid during 2026, aiming to reach an overall total of around $210 billion, approximately the value of frozen Russian assets that Kiev and several European states hope to repurpose for Ukraine's reconstruction. The total damage caused to Ukraine by the war is estimated at 3 times that figure. There's hope that eventually the diplomatic ball might roll back toward Moscow, which has once again preemptively rejected U.S. proposals. Russia is not ready for compromise regarding territories, not only in Donbas, but also in Zaporizhia and Kherson, said Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov in an interview with ABC. Responding to a journalist's suggestion that Moscow is demanding more land than it has captured militarily, Ryabkov replied that the 2 Donbas republics became integral parts of the Russian Federation through referendums in 2022. I'm not even speaking of Crimea. That story dates back to 2014, he added. According to him, Russia now has 5 constituent regions and cannot consider any compromise on this fundamental element of statehood enshrined in the constitution. When pressed on what compromises Moscow could possibly mean, given its insistence on controlling Ukrainian territory and blocking NATO membership for Kiev, Ryabkov refused to elaborate, but assured that he was confident in a soon resolution of the crisis. I am almost certain we are standing at the threshold of ending this terrible situation, he said. In short, the Kremlin continues to cling to its delusions of a breakthrough on the front line, and therefore rejects any real negotiation. The question remains whether Washington will recognize that these dreams have no basis in reality. Ukraine, on the other hand, keeps trying to look more constructive in Trump's eyes without giving up its principles. According to RBC Ukraine, Zelensky has instructed Parliament to draft a law allowing elections during martial law. The bill, discussed at a recent working meeting, proposes that elections be held within 60 days of their announcement and possibly over several days. The initial version of Vitkov and Dmitriev's peace plan included presidential elections 100 days after a ceasefire. Yet according to the Kiev International Institute of Sociology, 57% of Ukrainians believe presidential elections should only take place after a final peace agreement and the full end of the war. Only 9% want elections now. Sources within the Ukrainian government told RBC that Zelensky's order to prepare the bill is not about holding elections, but rather a diplomatic gesture, a response to Trump's recent criticism that Ukraine has not held elections for too long. Russian officials, however, have already rejected the idea of any ceasefire to allow voting. If the idea is to create a pretext for a pause at the front, that will not work, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said on December 12th. Ukraine is doing everything possible to appear as a partner ready for compromise, without surrendering its sovereignty. How this political game ends, we will soon find out. Wait for your command, give me the next part, to continue. Part 2. The most pragmatic and at the same time emotional negotiations are continuing behind closed doors in Europe. The Ukrainian ombudsman, Dmytro Lubinets, has reported remarkable though modest progress in humanitarian exchanges with Russia. According to him, Kiev and Moscow, through mediation by the International Committee of the Red Cross, have agreed on several practical steps to help Ukrainian citizens detained or missing in Russia and in the occupied territories. During his meeting with Russian Ombudsman Tatiana Moskalkova, Lubinets said that 2,000 parcels of humanitarian aid and personal letters were delivered to Ukrainian prisoners of war, and that both sides exchanged lists of missing persons and severely wounded or ill civilians. 15 Ukrainian citizens, most of them elderly or disabled, have returned home after long months of forced detention in Russia. Among them, a 56-year-old woman who suffered a stroke and spent 4 years trapped in the Russian Federation. Her reunion with her daughter in Ukraine, after all this time, became one of the few moments of hope amid the war's darkness. 45 more Ukrainians were freed from Russian detention centers, highlighting that even minimal humanitarian cooperation can bring real human relief. But on the broader diplomatic front, tension is rising. Belgium continues to block the European Union's plan for a reparations loan to Ukraine, demanding stronger guarantees against possible lawsuits or retaliation from Moscow. Brussels fears that Russia could later demand compensation or seize assets in response, since the largest share of frozen Russian funds is held in Belgium's Euroclear depository. Late-night negotiations within the European Council have so far failed to break the deadlock. Belgium wants a separate legal shield protecting it individually, not just collective guarantees from the EU. This cautious stance has prevented the release of some $210 billion in frozen Russian assets that could be redirected to support Ukraine through 2027. European officials privately admit that Belgium's concerns are legally justified, but politically damaging. Without Belgian approval, the loan mechanism cannot proceed. Officials hope to reach an agreement by mid-December, as the first disbursement is planned for the second quarter of 2026. If this mechanism is approved, it could become a turning point, both financially and politically. It would not only secure Ukraine's budget for the coming years, but also demonstrate that Europe is finally capable of acting decisively against Moscow's economic blackmail. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense front remains the centerpiece of global attention. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal has summarized the results of the 32nd Ramstein format meeting, a crucial coordination platform for military aid to Kiev. According to him, Ukraine could receive up to $45 billion in military support in 2026 alone, while total needs next year will reach about $120 billion. The pledges announced during the meeting were striking. Germany will allocate €11.5 billion, focusing on air defense systems, drones, and artillery ammunition. Berlin has already transferred new Patriot and Iris-T air defense batteries. The United Kingdom will invest £600 million in air defense, partly using frozen Russian assets. Canada is sending $30 million for Ukrainian drone production and additional missiles. The Netherlands has promised €700 million. Denmark will contribute a €250 million package, including air defense and aviation support. Estonia and Latvia will both dedicate up to 5% of their GDP to continued Ukrainian assistance. Lithuania, more than €220 million. Luxembourg, $100 million. And Norway, a record $7 billion. The Czech initiative for purchasing artillery shells for Ukraine has already financed 760,000 rounds, an unprecedented figure in Europe's modern history. But behind the numbers lies an increasingly fragile front. Western analysts warn that the Russian military, despite enormous losses, continues to pressure Ukrainian positions, especially around Siversk, Huliaipole, and Pokrovsk. Russian forces attempt to regain momentum through constant assaults, while Ukraine relies heavily on drones, fortifications, and artillery to hold the line. Yet Moscow's optimism seems detached from reality. German Bundestag defense expert Roderich Kiesewetter recently claimed that Russia had deployed 2 army corps in Belarus, about 360,000 combat-ready troops capable of striking NATO countries. The statement caused shock, but raised doubts. Independent analysts quickly pointed out that such numbers are logistically impossible. Even during the 2022 invasion, Russia deployed fewer troops, despite assembling multiple armies. Western intelligence agencies, which closely monitor Belarusian territory, have reported no such concentration. Baltic defense ministries also remain silent. Thus, the claim appears exaggerated, perhaps politically motivated to attract attention within German debates on defense spending. While misinformation circulates, the United States has opened a new geopolitical front. President Donald Trump has announced what he called a total maritime blockade of Venezuela, targeting all sanctioned oil tankers traveling to or from the country. Through his social platform, Truth Social, Trump accused President Nicolas Maduro of stealing American property, referring to Venezuela's nationalization of oil fields 2 decades ago. He branded the Caracas regime a terrorist organization, linking it to drug trafficking and human rights abuses. Trump declared that Venezuela is now surrounded by the largest armada in South American history, vowing that it would expand until the country returns every drop of oil and every piece of land stolen from the United States. The statement triggered confusion in Washington and among allies, as many questioned its legality and strategic purpose. Analysts noted that while the language was fierce, concrete steps beyond rhetorical escalation were unclear. Several American and Latin American media outlets reminded audiences that back-channel communications between Trump's advisors and Maduro had been ongoing for months, exploring the dictator's possible exit under certain guarantees. Whether this blockade is a real policy or another dramatic gesture remains uncertain. At the same time, Ukraine's defense forces have continued their own operations with growing confidence. The Special Operations Forces reported successful strikes on ammunition depots and drone warehouses in occupied Donetsk. Ukrainian drones hit a missile fuel factory in Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, Rostov region, igniting massive fires visible for miles. The Russian governor confirmed the attack but downplayed the damage. In another operation, Ukrainian drones targeted a column of S-400 surface-to-air missile systems near the village of Raevka in Belgorod region. According to reports, at least one launcher was destroyed and another damaged. Although Russian channels claimed no casualties, experts believe the loss further weakens Moscow's air defense shield. Meanwhile, in southern Ukraine, a series of devastating Russian drone and missile strikes again targeted civilian infrastructure. In Nikopol, one person was killed and several homes were destroyed. In Zaporizhia, 4 civilians were injured after a Shahed drone hit a residential building, setting apartments ablaze. Fires also erupted in Chernihiv region, where drones struck a farm, killing livestock and damaging equipment. Odessa region suffered one of the largest attacks of the month. A massive fire broke out at a warehouse storing heating appliances and household goods after a swarm of drones hit industrial zones. Though no casualties were reported, the economic damage was substantial. Energy infrastructure remains a key target. Overnight strikes left entire districts of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Mykolaiv regions without power. Ukrainian energy companies have been racing to restore electricity to hundreds of thousands of homes. "This is daily warfare against our civilians," a local official in Kharkiv told reporters, "but we are repairing faster than they can destroy." The front lines themselves tell an increasingly complex story. Near Siversk, Russian troops consolidated positions in Serhivka and along the eastern bank of the Bakhmutivka River, while pushing toward the ruins of what once were thriving villages. According to independent analysts like the researcher known as Playfrap, Russian units have captured strategic high ground north of Sviatopokrovsk, allowing them to monitor Ukrainian logistics routes. If they maintain control, they could position drone operators on those heights, threatening Ukraine's supply lines. Playfrap describes the situation as urgent, warning that Ukrainian forces must stabilize this sector quickly to prevent a breakthrough towards Sloviansk. Still, he notes that despite Russian advances, Ukrainian units remain disciplined, withdrawing in an organized manner to new defensive lines. In the south, near Huliaipole in Zaporizhia region, the situation also deteriorated. Russian troops advanced from the south and east, reaching the outskirts of the town. Ukrainian forces withdrew beyond the Haichur River to reinforce natural defensive barriers. Drones and artillery strikes slowed the Russian momentum but did not stop it entirely. Analysts describe this area as a potential crisis zone, though they emphasize that Ukrainian defenders still control the western bank. Each meter of land there has become a symbol of resilience. And while maps online show colored zones shifting slightly each day, the human toll on both sides continues to rise. The Russian Ministry of Defense, after days of silence, released an oddly staged video claiming complete control over Kupiansk, a city in the Kharkiv region that has seen some of the fiercest battles. The spokesperson, filmed at an undisclosed location, insisted that all districts of the liberated city are under reliable control. However, independent sources and satellite imagery suggest otherwise. Russian forces remain outside the city limits, and Ukrainian defenders still hold several neighborhoods. The contradictions mirror a familiar pattern in Russia's military propaganda, where reports of liberation often precede reality by weeks, or never materialize at all. Ukrainian observers mockingly noted that even the Russian military's own video betrayed its falsehood, as the spokesman admitted to broadcasting from a command post of the 121st Motorized Rifle Regiment, located well north of the actual combat zone. And still, beyond the battlefields, the stories of individual soldiers continue to reveal the decay inside Russia's army. Leaked recordings from Russian medical personnel in the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade describe catastrophic losses near Pokrovsk, nearly 790 soldiers dead, 48 pages of names in their records. The medic speaking in the video recounts scenes of chaos, drunkenness, and despair. Comrades stepping on mines after drinking, officers joining in drunken brawls, and commanders who punish subordinates instead of helping them recover. She also spoke of widespread desertion. More than 900 soldiers listed as having abandoned their posts, 3 times higher than last year. They drink, they flee, they die, and we are left to drag their bodies, she said. The video, verified by Ukrainian intelligence, provides a raw glimpse into what Russia calls heroic defense. Desertion has become such a problem that the Russian State Duma has rushed through new amendments to the criminal code, increasing penalties to up to 20 years in prison for leaving a unit during mobilization. Even pretending to be ill or injuring oneself to avoid combat now carries up to 12 years.
Officials describe these laws as necessary for maintaining discipline, but critics inside Russia argue that the measures are merely an attempt to mask the scale of disobedience spreading across the ranks. Since the start of the war, tens of thousands of Russian convicts have been forcibly mobilized. Many vanish without a trace, while their families receive vague notices or no information at all. Wait for your command. Give me the next part to continue. Part 3. Inside Russia, the machinery of lies that fuels the war continues to devour its own creators. A revealing post by a little-known Russian military blogger named Zimovsky recently circulated online, explaining in detail how false reports travel upward through the army's chain of command. At the platoon level, soldiers exaggerate minor advances, claiming to have secured positions, even if they only briefly appeared on the map. At company and battalion levels, uncertainty is replaced with phrases like "area cleared" or "progress achieved." By the time these reports reach divisional headquarters, they are reshaped into color-coded maps, PowerPoint slides, and videos for generals. The term "liberated settlement" becomes a polished illusion that hides the reality of half-ruined trenches and temporary footholds. When these narratives reach the general staff, they are transformed into final, unquestionable statements: mission accomplished, territory fully under control. This bureaucratic alchemy turns defeat into success. Soldiers die to retake the same positions that their superiors already reported as secured. The cycle repeats endlessly, creating a culture where truth itself has vanished from the battlefield. Kupiansk became the latest example of this system. Russian propaganda repeatedly claimed the city had been liberated, even as Ukrainian drone footage showed Russian units pinned outside the suburbs, suffering losses from artillery and FPV drones. When reality contradicts reports, officers simply rewrite history. The incentive to lie, to protect careers and avoid punishment, outweighs the incentive to win. As Zimovsky wrote,
The act of reporting victory replaces the act of achieving it. Analysts say this culture of deception is not a side effect, but a structural feature of Putin's military machine, where the appearance of success is more important than the truth on the ground. Yet, even within this machinery, the cost of illusion grows unbearable. Data released by the Ukrainian project I Want to Live shows that Russia's 810th Separate Marine Brigade, once an elite Sevastopol unit, has effectively been wiped out multiple times. Over 2,000 Marines from that brigade are confirmed killed. Since the full-scale invasion began, the brigade has been redeployed across several fronts, from Kherson to Kursk, suffering devastating losses each time. Relatives of the dead have submitted more than 17,000 requests to the I Want to Find database, desperate to learn the fate of missing family members. The brigade's commander, Oleg Vlasov, promoted to Major General and decorated as a hero of Russia, remains a symbol of the system's cynicism, rewarded for mass casualties and empty victories. Reports from soldiers describe suicide missions ordered under threat of execution. Some soldiers were forced at gunpoint into armored vehicles to charge Ukrainian tanks through minefields. The brigade became notorious for insubordination, desertion, and even cases of soldiers killing their officers, desperate acts in an army that treats its own men as expendable tools. One such soldier, Zakhar Stanislavovich Galushkin, born in 1997, told his story after fleeing from his unit, the 37th Motor Rifle Regiment. He was wounded by a drone strike on September 11, 2025, but when he reported his injury, his commanders refused evacuation. Instead, they accused him of self-harm and demanded he write a confession. When he refused, his deputy political officer, Captain Damir Gafarov, known by the call sign Kachkar, beat him with a rubber baton and a chair, demanding 1 million rubles within 2 days, threatening to finish him off if he didn't pay. When Zakhar still refused, he was sent to a penal assault unit. There, his group was ordered to attack across open fields in daylight, under enemy drones. Realizing they were being sent to die, Zakhar turned off his radio and escaped. He now hides in forest strips, fearing his own commanders more than Ukrainian fire. "If they find me, they'll erase me," he said in a recorded message. "I'm not afraid of the enemy. I'm afraid of my own people." His testimony adds to hundreds of similar accounts from Russian deserters, describing extortion, torture, and execution by officers who demand bribes in exchange for survival. The scale of desertion has reached a point where Russia's parliament is openly rewriting the criminal code to maintain control. New laws now impose up to 20 years in prison for leaving a unit with a weapon during wartime, up to 12 for doing so unarmed, and similar terms for faking illness or injury. These amendments were passed in December, as Russia quietly extended its partial mobilization decree from 2022, which has never been officially lifted. It means every soldier in the Russian army is permanently subject to wartime law. The official explanation claims it is to ensure the country's defense capability, but the real reason is panic. Commanders know the army is hollowing out from within, and fear alone has become the last instrument of discipline.
But while Moscow tightens repression, cracks within Russian society are becoming impossible to ignore. The recent school tragedy on Rubliovka, one of the wealthiest areas of the Moscow region, shocked even hardened propagandists. A teenage student, 14-year-old Timofey Kliuka, from the elite Gorky II school, attacked his classmates and teachers with a knife, killing a fourth grader named Kabilyon, the son of a Tajik janitor. Witnesses say that before attacking, Timofey asked, "What nationality are you?" Investigators later discovered his 11-page manifesto titled My Rage, filled with racist and extremist slogans. He blamed minorities, LGBT people, Jews, and liberals for Russia's problems. On social media, he appeared in a black shirt and tactical vest marked with the phrase, "No life matters," echoing white supremacist imagery used by neo-Nazi groups abroad. He had also painted, "Stop your genocide against our white nation," on his helmet.
In his writings, he referred to Muslims as primitive apes, language lifted directly from Russian ultranationalist channels. Police later revealed that Timofey had tried to build a homemade bomb days before the attack and was searching for a dark-skinned teacher he had mentioned in his messages. The attack, which left one child dead and several injured, became one of the first known school killings in Russia, motivated by racial hatred.
It followed a similar incident in April in Nekrasovsky, where a 14-year-old boy murdered a 9-year-old Kyrgyz child because he was not Russian. The independent research group Sova Center, which tracks hate crimes, reports a sharp rise in racially motivated violence since 2023, with perpetrators increasingly young, often teenagers as young as 13. The center attributes this to state propaganda that glorifies war and dehumanizes enemies inside and outside Russia. Sociologists warn that such cases are not isolated. They are symptoms of a culture steeped in hate, a culture cultivated deliberately by the Kremlin. For years, Russian television and official telegram channels have promoted xenophobia, claiming that migrants destroy Russia, Muslims invade schools, and Westerners plan to erase Russian identity. Every week, politicians like Dmitry Medvedev and propagandists like Vladimir Solovyov and Margarita Simonyan speak of annihilating other nations as if it were patriotic virtue. This constant stream of hatred now shapes young minds. Teenagers imitate the militarized imagery of war, camouflage, helmets, nationalist slogans, turning the aesthetics of violence into identity. The Rublyovka killing exposed this directly. A child of Russia's privileged elite, armed and radicalized by the very ideology that state media injects daily into millions of homes.
Experts inside Russia quietly acknowledge that the Z culture, glorifying death and destruction, has escaped control. It no longer just justifies war, it reproduces it inside society itself. Psychologists speak of an entire generation being raised on violent propaganda, one that sees aggression as a measure of strength and cruelty as a form of belonging. The fear is that the Rublyovka incident is only the beginning. When a state teaches children to hate, children eventually bring that hate back home, said one Moscow-based researcher requesting anonymity for safety. Even the Russian Investigative Committee, usually obedient to political narratives, admitted that motives of hostility cannot be ruled out. But in public, officials avoid the word racism, preferring domestic conflict. The tragedy starkly exposes how the war in Ukraine has infected Russian domestic life. Every day, television celebrates violence, calls Ukrainians Nazis, glorifies killers from Wagner, and mocks Western democracies as decadent. The message saturates social networks, music, and online games. For many young Russians, nationalism has replaced moral conscience. Those who question it risk arrest for discrediting the army. The state itself has legalized hatred, and now that hatred spills from the screens into classrooms. What happened in Gorky 2 was not an accident.
It was a reflection of what Russia has become, a country that calls for the destruction of others and ends up destroying itself from within. Meanwhile, the war outside Russia continues its brutal rhythm. Ukrainian forces maintain pressure along the front lines, striking ammunition depots, drone factories, and logistical hubs deep in occupied territory. The Security Service of Ukraine confirmed that a recent drone attack in Novorossiysk damaged a Russian submarine docked at the pier. Satellite images show scorch marks on the pier and an absence of the vessel that had previously been moored there, suggesting it may have been towed away for repairs, or worse, sunk. Even the supposedly safe harbor of the Black Sea Fleet now faces constant attacks. In Belgorod region, another drone strike destroyed a convoy transporting S-400 missiles. Each such incident chips away at Moscow's illusion of invulnerability. But beyond the front lines, a quieter kind of war unfolds, one for truth, for memory,
and for the survival of reason in a time of madness. Each day brings new evidence that Russia's aggression corrodes not only Ukraine's cities, but Russia's soul. Families mourn their dead sons sent to die for lies. Refugees struggle to rebuild shattered homes. And in the heart of Moscow's elite district, a child raised on propaganda commits a murder born of hate.
This is the real face of Putin's special operation, not just the ruins of Mariupol or the blackouts in Kharkiv, but the poisoned minds of a generation taught to despise, to fear, and to obey. It is a tragedy that spreads like an infection, crossing borders, eroding human empathy, turning an entire nation inward against itself. Ukraine, despite exhaustion, continues to resist, not only with weapons, but with faith that truth still matters. Each liberated prisoner, each repaired power line, each small act of defiance becomes part of a larger moral front. The world watches, sometimes wearily, but history will record who fought for freedom and who drowned in their own hatred. And as this war of attrition grinds on, the line between the battlefield and the home front blurs. In Ukraine, courage is survival. In Russia, survival now means silence. But silence has its breaking point. One day it will shatter.